For the longest time, cannibals in movies were treated like the others. They were a faraway group of creatures, savages, who were completely stripped of humanity. They were not people, they were monsters. Cannibalism as a plot device was most of the time used for shock value in horror movies. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, Italian filmmakers in particular leaned heavily on cannibalistic themes. They liked telling stories about scary and dangerous cannibal tribes in the rainforests of South America, Asia, or Africa. These films were deemed offensive due to extreme brutality, racism, and misogyny. The most famous example from that whole era, which you might have heard of, is Cannibal Holocaust. Of course, even during that period, there were movies that utilized cannibalism in a more creative, less gruesome way, blending it with humor. For instance, a comedy horror movie about a group of women who use their seductive charm to lure and eat men, or a dark tale about a little boy who suspects his parents are feeding him human meat. Yet, the first movie which challenged the idea and the image of a cannibal and helped bring the whole thing to the mainstream was Silence of the Lambs. People saw Hannibal Lecter and they fell for him, even though he was a cannibalistic serial killer. He's likable because he's charismatic, polite, and intelligent. And even though he's ostracized by society, he's human, and that makes him a different kind of monster, the one that can emerge inside anyone given particular circumstances. And this idea of using cannibalism to explore human nature and psyche and seeing it more as a metaphor is what's been happening in contemporary film. Specifically, we're witnessing a rise of stories centering on a female cannibal. It's not surprising considering the times and the culture we live in. There are discussions about environmental issues and meat industry. There are debates over women's reproductive rights, gender issues, and sexual politics. The language also showcases this. You have anti-capitalist slogan "Eat the Rich" that became trendy, and after people saw the success of the movie Parasite, it has now become one of the most popular themes to explore in cinema as well. You also have a social media trend called Feral Girl Summer that was basically all about rejecting the perfect-looking, smoothie-drinking, avocado-eating, fitness-obsessed lifestyle which you often see on the internet. Girls and young women stopped giving a damn about things. They started embracing the messiness of life, and the original Feral Girls, which are considered to be the inspiration for all of this, are HBO Girls and Fleabag, obviously. The feral girl can be characterized as someone who doesn't care about what anyone else thinks about them.
Should I be embarrassed?
They stand their ground, they don't want to be nice to people who don't deserve it, they allow themselves not to be perfect, to feel their emotions, to be sensitive and vulnerable, and that's why they're viewed as chaotic when it comes to their mental state.
It's like you're manic.
A female cannibal that we're now seeing on screen is essentially this feral girl who is trying to subvert expectations and break free from the overwhelming social pressures. So let's examine a couple of modern movies and look at how they handle the subject of cannibalism. With women choosing the topic of cannibalism in the same moment, I think it's absolutely mind-blowing. I think the fact that women want to tear up the skin is very interesting. I do believe that the skin is the recipient of the outside look. It's your envelope. I do think that somehow, symbolically, women want to get rid of that skin that has been sexualized, glamorized, and seen as something that is completely not relatable for women. They want to tear up that skin to be completely raw. The first movie I'm going to talk about is Raw, written and directed by Julia Ducournau. I think I will be biased as hell because this is my #1 movie which I can easily watch daily till the day I die. I've never related to a character so greatly, and at that point, I'd never seen anything like this. Raw tells the story of Justine, a 16-year-old vegetarian girl who begins her first semester at veterinary school. After she's pressured into participating in a hazing ritual of eating a raw rabbit kidney, she struggles to tame her newly discovered hunger for real human flesh. Cannibalism in Justine's case conveys roughly these three main ideas. The hardships of coming of age, this includes body image, peer pressure, sexuality, independence, violent nature of sisterhood, and family/generational curse. From the very beginning, even before you get to the bloody horror stuff, Justine's world already looks very uneasy and menacing, just not welcoming at all. You first see Justine in the roadside cafeteria with her parents as she's trying to pick the food she wants to eat. She's being very polite, smiling and saying please, but the lady behind the counter is indifferent to all of this. She roughly throws a scoop of mashed potatoes on Justine's plate and half of it lands on Justine's hand. Yet it doesn't end there, because as soon as Justine takes the first bite, she feels that there is something else in her mashed potatoes. a single lonely meatball. Her mother starts freaking out since the whole family is vegetarian, but mostly because if Justine bites into the meat, her cannibal nature, which she inherited from her mother, will come out, but you don't know it yet. Despite Justine's pleading not to cause a scene, her mother still decides to go and talk to that apathetic lady server. Once that's done, Justine's parents drive her to her new school. Since both of the parents studied in the same college, Justine's mom starts explaining to her what is what, but Justine still feels very anxious and apprehensive.
Jamais m'y retrouver.
Alex, Justine's oldest sister, who is studying there too, is supposed to pick Justine up and escort her to her dorm, but they can't get a hold of her. Once again, Justine's mother becomes worried because she doesn't want to leave Justine by herself.
Non mais j'hallucine. On va pas laisser Juju toute seule.
But there is pretty much nothing that can be done, and the father of the family knows this, so he gives Justine the words of encouragement, and the parents finally leave. These two consecutive scenes paint the dynamic within Justine's family in a very clear way. You immediately understand what kind of personality each of them has, even though you haven't seen Justine's sister Alex yet. While Justine's mother is quite overbearing, her dad is a more laid-back person who is trying to instill independence in his kids. Justine is quiet, reserved, and diligent. She never breaks the rules. She naturally enjoys studying and being a top student.
Non mais c'est facile, je te jure.
She's never been romantically interested in anyone, and she's definitely not a party girl. You won't see her wearing dresses and heels or makeup.
C'est pas trop mon style.
She's not even bothered by having body hair.
Putain, Jus, à ton âge, je me faisais déjà le brésilien toute seule. Hein.
At the beginning, Justine thinks she's perfect. Nobody ever questioned or challenged any of these aspects of her personality, but it's all about to change because college is its own world with its own laws and hierarchy. Justine gets no time to settle in since hazing starts in the middle of her first night at the dorm. The freshmen are treated like animals. A week-long hazing includes, but is not limited to, being forced to crawl on all fours, drinking till you pass out, getting covered in animal blood for a picture, being forced to eat a raw rabbit kidney, having a dress code on certain days. If you don't do it, you will be forced to wear a diaper for the whole day, and being pressured into sexual acts. During the first night, Justine also meets her new roommate, Adrian. And given that Justine doesn't know anyone else among her peers yet, she follows Adrian like a lost puppy during the whole initiation night, until she finally stumbles upon her drunken sister Alex. But even Alex can't shelter and protect Justine from the cruel world of adolescence and peer pressure, because she's an active participant in all of this. Alex is the one who pressures Justine to eat the raw kidney, which sets off Justine's transformation. This transformation first begins with the body. Justine gets a severe rash. She literally starts shedding her skin like a snake. It's so bad that she's forced to go to a nurse's office where she's given a cream and a piece of advice.
Vous situez où, vous?
Moyenne.
Bon bah alors, trouvez-vous un coin tranquille et attendez que ça passe. Hein.
The advice is not really applicable to Justine anymore because her metamorphosis has already begun. Justine starts eating more and more meat, starting with cooked one, of course. At first, she tries stealing a hamburger patty from the cafeteria. She is there with Adrian, and it's interesting that he is not fazed by the fact that Justine wants to eat meat as a vegetarian. He's more confused about her stealing it. Justine is baffled too by what just happened. She feels ashamed, so she throws the meat in the trash. Right in the next scene, Adrian decides to take Justine for a late-night trip to a gas station where they sell meat sandwiches that he likes, and Justine devours the whole thing. This transition from her being a vegetarian for all her life to just casually eating meat is very seamless and quick. There is no inner conflict about the morality of it all, which some might expect, because this movie is not about being or not being a vegetarian.
It's happened sometimes that I've read that it was a vegan movie. I'm like, how, where, why? I mean, have you seen the movie? Really? I mean, come on.
That same night, after eating that meaty sandwich, Justine still struggles to calm her cravings down, so she sneaks to the fridge to eat raw chicken breasts. Justine's mental state gets further exacerbated by a conversation she has with one of her professors, who mocks her for being a high achiever. He believes this is very detrimental to other students' mental health, so he is willing to sacrifice Justine's.
Votre présence n'est pas indispensable.
This interaction makes Justine physically throw up, and what comes out of her body is not what you expect. It's not the raw meat that she ate last night, it's her own hair. She's in such severe mental distress that she didn't even notice that she'd been eating her own hair. And this is the most disgusting scene in the movie for me personally. Some people noticed that Justine's struggles mirror experiences of people who suffer from eating disorders. The binge eating, the vomiting. People around Justine make comments that point to this too.
Tu vas pas te taper un trip anorexique quand même, c'est glauque.
Nevertheless, it was not the director's intention. Quote, I actually had no awareness of writing that before I saw it on screen. It's not exactly about eating disorders at all. I have a more general interest about the body than just this. But it must have subconsciously been in my mind because I really wanted to see a young girl who was not the prey of this terrible hazing that society does to women." End quote. Justine's sister Alex does try helping her in the way she thinks is best, and this mostly means changing yourself to fit in with the crowd. When the dress code of the day for freshmen is nightclub, Alex lends her little sister a dress and shoes in which Justine looks very uncomfortable. But the accident that becomes a pivotal point in both of their lives happens during a bikini waxing session. This very intimate and unashamed moment is the second scene that makes me wince. It's always something that has to do with freaking hair for me. As a viewer, you're right there in Justine's crotch together with Alex, who is trying in a very carefree but at the same time forceful manner to wax some of Justine's pubic hair that is sticking out on the sides. Not the whole thing, thank God, but these spots seem to be the most painful due to their inconvenient location. Justine tries stopping Alex a couple of times because she can't handle the pain, but Alex, in her rough older sister manner, tells her that they have to finish what they started, otherwise it will be uneven. Nothing goes as planned when Alex struggles to tear off the wax strip from Justine's skin. They both start freaking out, and this is when Alex decides to bring scissors to cut the wax. Justine flips out so hard that she kicks the scissors out of Alex's hand, severing part of her sister's finger in the process. While Alex is lying on the floor unconscious, Justine is waiting for an ambulance to come. Over the phone, she's told to keep the finger cold using ice, but since there is no ice in the fridge, she decides to do the next logical thing, to eat her sister's finger. This is the turning point in Justine's transformation, and it's accompanied by a sudden change in the background music too. From this point forward, you'll be seeing a different version of her. When Alex gains consciousness and catches her sister in the act, her eyes fill with tears at the sight. But not because Justine is effed up and she's scared, but because she realizes that her little sister is going through the same hardships she went through. They're both cannibals. But where Alex gets it wrong is thinking that Justine is gonna go down the same path as her. Alex feeds her cravings by instigating car crashes on the road not far from the school, which allows her to eat already dead or still alive but injured people inside the vehicle. She takes Justine to the spot to demonstrate how she does it, but Justine gets repulsed by it and runs away. Justine's cannibalistic urges go hand in hand with her sexual awakening. She's trying to learn how to take agency of her own body and, more broadly, her whole life. There's always a struggle within her between her animal versus humane nature. Justine's cannibalism helps her be more confident. You see her talk back to her mom for the first time.
Bon, c'est bon, la maman, tu la lâches, merde!
Justine, tu parles pas comme ça à ta mère.
You also see her appreciating her own body when she decides to wear the same navy blue cocktail dress she used to be so uncomfortable in and dance in front of a mirror in her room. She even puts on red lipstick. For Julia Ducournau, it was important to show a sexually empowered young woman who is going to embrace the changes happening in her body instead of drowning in insecurities. Quote, "I love the scene in the mirror when Justine dances because she's proud and she's fierce and she's not like, oh my god, I look fat." End quote. All of Justine's first sexual experiences are portrayed in a very primal and totally possessed way, with a focus on the physical more than the mental, because Ducournau believes that sexuality is all about our bodies. Quote, "The portrayal of sexuality when it comes to young girls on our screens is often all about what's in their heads. Like, is he the right guy? Is he gonna call me? Am I a slut? But sexuality is a matter of the body. I wanted to portray women's sexuality as self-consumed, with one aim, to orgasm." End quote. The first sexual encounter Justine has is forced on her by other older students who douse her in blue paint and then push her into a room with another boy who is already covered in yellow paint. Justine ends up losing control and biting off a chunk from the guy's lip. Her second sexual experience occurs because she actually wants it. Justine sleeps with Adrian, and this is one of the best sex scenes in cinema hands down. It's so feral and passionate without being overly explicit. Nobody really likes when movies shove genitals into your face. Justine again gets completely consumed. She's aggressive, she does try biting Adrian, but at the point of climax, she actually ends up biting into her own arm. Alex doesn't really believe that Justine can go on living like this without feeding herself properly. Seeing how Justine doesn't let herself fully give in to her monstrous side, Alex feels jealous.
Je sais ce que ça fait. Tu vas pas tenir comme ça.
Ouais, bah moi, c'est pas pareil.
It all comes to a head during a party. Justine gets extremely intoxicated. Her behavior is all over the place. She's bumping into people, trying to kiss them. When she almost gets into a physical altercation with someone, Alex comes and gets her out of the situation, but only to embarrass Justine even more a moment later. Alex takes Justine to a morgue where she pulls out a corpse, which she then uses to trigger Justine's cannibalistic side and ridicule her in front of dozens of students. When Justine wakes up the next day in her bed, she doesn't remember any of it. She's pretty confused when people in the hallway start looking at her sideways, or when a girl she sits down next to moves away from her. After classes, Adrian catches Justine to show her the video that's been circulating around school in which she's acting like an animal. She looks completely sick, both physically and mentally. This situation rings especially true in this day and age when everybody has a video camera in their pocket and your mistakes might get posted online where they will stay forever for anyone to judge. It looks like Alex made fun of Justine in such a cruel way to prove to her that she can't escape who she really is. Alex might believe that she has way more self-control than her little sister, but this is not exactly true, which brings us to the finale. Once Justine learns about the video, she finds her sister and they start physically fighting in front of everybody. They begin consuming each other, biting into each other's arms. Alex tears chunk out of Justine's cheek. Julia Ducournau's aim was to show how people devour each other in their relationships and how siblings treat each other's bodies like it's their own. They never ask for permission or consent. Quote, "What is so great about sisterhood or brotherhood is that when you have a sibling that is the same sex as you are, your body in front of the other person is not shameful. It's more like you're one body rather than two bodies. There's some kind of fusion. I really like that, and I think it's also a way for the siblings to eat each other up. It's a bit sadistic if you think about it." End quote.
Jamais deux filles, ma chérie, c'est trop de soucis.
When people try pulling Alex and Justine away from each other, they get defensive. Now it's them together against all the other students that treat them as entertainment. As soon as they break free, they go to the dorms to patch each other up. Justine does seem to admire her sister, and at the beginning of the story she looked up to her because Alex was confident and well socially integrated. But as Justine gradually came into her own, she started to realize that her sister is actually losing her humanity more and more. Julia Ducournau explained that Alex represents the animality in Justine. She is her dark shadow. This is what Justine could be like, but doesn't want to be. Quote, "Justine's journey is ascending, a self-discovery. She goes from childhood to womanhood through the movie. And the sister is descending. She goes from a very powerful and confident character to pretty much a ghost or a zombie. She completely loses her soul." End quote. After the girls finish treating their wounds, Justine lets Alex stay in her room while she goes to sleep with Adrian. There is a moment when Justine is thinking of locking Alex in the room, but she doesn't do it. And this results in the horrific death of Adrian during the night.
The reason why she eats him is because she can and because she's hungry, like any animals. You're hungry, you eat. And so you don't care whether you kill or not, you just eat.
When Justine finds Alex slumped on the floor, being covered in blood, with a completely blank look on her face, she still takes care of her sister. One interesting thing to point out is that Alex is wearing the same white t-shirt with a unicorn on it that Justine wore at the beginning of the movie. Quote, "I wanted something that conveyed childhood, something super innocent and super first degree for Justine at the beginning, that shows where she started from, which is being a child and living with her parents and stuff like that. And I think between sisters, it's super normal to share clothes, and it makes us feel the comfort there is between them. More importantly, the fact that the older sister Alexia wears the shirt at the end and the shirt is tainted with blood shows the contradictory journey they've both been through. In the end, the younger sister has outgrown her own sister." End quote. After all, Alexia is imprisoned for the murder of Adrian. Justine visits her together with the parents, and you can tell that they still love each other. The movie ends with a conversation between Justine and her father. He tells her that what happened is neither hers nor Alexia's fault, and he reveals their family secret. They inherited their cannibalistic urges from their mother. He shows Justine his scars and reassures her that she will definitely find her own way to deal with this curse.
Mais je suis sûr que toi, tu trouveras une solution, ma puce.
It isn't a super huge plot twist if you think about it, because if Alex suffers from this and Justine is too, this means they got it from their parents. But it's compelling that Julia Ducournau decided to portray cannibalism as something that can be passed from one generation to another. It's like a negative generational pattern of behavior you don't want to replicate in your own life or relationships. Alex and Justine both judge each other for becoming more and more like their mother, even before the reveal.
Mais pourquoi tu m'embrouilles alors? On dirait maman.
C'est on dirait maman.
Julia Ducournau said, quote, "Sometimes it hurts people when I say that family is a form of determinism. But I think it is. You see patterns reproduced, even if it's against your will. Is there anything I can do? Am I the product of my parents, or am I my own self? It's about questioning to what extent you have a chance to act on things." End quote. This is not the end of Justine's struggles, but she's come a long way to her humanity and independence. Cannibalism was her liberating journey that released her from expectations that have been imposed on her by family, school, and ultimately herself. For us, eating and being eaten belong to the terrible secret of love. We love only the person we can eat. The person we hate we can't swallow. That one makes us vomit. Even our friends are inedible. If we were asked to dig into our friend's flesh, we would be disgusted. The person we love, we dream only of eating. Bones and All positioned itself as being a coming-of-age, all-consuming love story between two cannibals, an extremely compelling premise which unfortunately didn't deliver whatsoever. Set in the late 1980s, something I would never guess myself even by looking at these girlies, the story centers around Maren, an 18-year-old girl who lives with her father Frank. The two of them have been moving around a lot due to Maren being a cannibal. As soon as she kills someone, they cover up their tracks and run. This is how her father has been protecting her all these years, and surprisingly, Maren doesn't seem to remember her past that much. She's a hard character to crack, because she has almost no personality and she doesn't change much throughout the whole story. What you get in the beginning is pretty much what you are left with at the end. One day, Maren sneaks out of her house at night to go to a sleepover she's been invited to by a classmate. It's funny that, like Justine's, Maren's first human taste test that you witness involves a finger. However, Maren's scene is strangely erotically charged. The way she looks and leans closer to her classmate before she grabs her hand to suck her finger to the bone is like a romantic scene where one person is dying to kiss another. And I thought to myself, oh my god, if this is the first scene, what the hell is gonna happen when she meets her love Lee, played by the overhyped Timothée Chalamet? How much blood and sex are we talking about? And there is blood and gore, I suppose, but there is no sensuality, no passion, and no sex and no love in the movie about love. After other girls physically pull Maren away from her classmate, she runs home still covered in blood. Frank immediately understands what happened. They grab their things and relocate to another state, where Maren soon gets abandoned by her own father. Frank leaves her some cash, her birth certificate, and a cassette tape. On the tape, he recounts stories of Maren's cannibalistic attacks, starting from the time she was only 3 years old. Frank grew more and more disturbed as he noticed that Maren displayed no remorse over her doings. She was turning into a monster. In the end, he expresses the hope that she will someday learn to tame her compulsions and will live a normal life.
Hoping that whatever troubles you is over and that you stop wanting things you shouldn't want, Maren, and that your heart has a chance.
This really mirrors what Justine's father tells her at the end, but in Maren's case, she doesn't have a supportive family cushion. She's completely on her own and is forced to grow up fast. This is a story about real survival, and despite Maren being pretty independent and crafty and outspoken, she can definitely handle things on her own.
Shouldn't you be in school?
I'm 18 in the state of Maryland, and I can decide for myself where I should be.
She's still actively seeking connection. She wants to find people like her, and she wants to be a part of the community and have a family in order to understand herself better. So she immediately embarks on a journey to find her mother, but on her way she meets all sorts of cannibals that are called eaters. The first eater that actually finds Maren is Sally, a mentally unstable man who talks about himself in third person.
You don't like Sally.
Why do you say your name like you're two different people?
Due to his extreme isolation and loneliness, he gets attached to Maren and wants to be her mentor. What differentiates him from other cannibals is that he doesn't kill. He leads Maren to a house in which an elderly woman is dying and invites her to feast, basically. This is the first time you see Maren experiencing something of a moral conflict within herself about eating people. However, the next morning she fully succumbs to her hunger and then she runs away from Sally. The next loner cannibal she encounters is Lee, a guy who's close to her age and with whom she shares a couple of things in common.
What was your first time like?
Was a babysitter.
Mine too.
Really?
Maren and Lee are supposed to be lovers. This is how the movie was marketed, it's on the poster. So why do they look and behave like they're buddies? Like they don't care if another person is there or not? I was baffled by the lack of chemistry between them and by boring-ass dialogues. What they have in the last 30 minutes of the movie is what I expected them to have from the very beginning. I just kept thinking, why do they love each other? Is it just because they're the same age and in the same circumstances? Another thing I've noticed is that Lee has a better arc than Maren. It's not even better, it's just complete. Everybody knows that this movie was hugely anticipated because Timothée Chalamet was gonna be in it. People were excited that he and the director of Call Me By Your Name were planning to collaborate again. I personally don't understand the hype around Timothée Chalamet. I don't hate him as a person, but in all the movies I've seen, he plays the same character, he plays himself. And now also every time I hear his name, I remember that tweet that compared him to a medieval shoe. I've actually only recently watched Call Me By Your Name, and I enjoyed it because it reminded me of a situation I was in. The depiction of the first love and the heartbreak were very nicely done, although the best part for me was the way sexuality was explored, and that's why I was so shocked that Bones and All had nothing of that sort. No yearning or longing, no animal thirst for another person. To have a love story about cannibals and not use it to show all of these things is such a waste. And I agree that not every movie or show needs sex scenes. You can tell when it was pointlessly put in there, but Bones and All just desperately needed at least one in my opinion. At first glance, both Marin and Lee have some type of unresolved inner conflict. For Marin, it's her cannibalistic nature, to eat or not to eat. Lee seems to have accepted this part of him, so his conflict is related to his family. He is haunted by the death of his father. Marin's meeting with her mother doesn't clear the air around her cannibalistic desire. Her mother locked herself in a mental institution because she considered herself a threat to people around her. Eventually, her cravings drove her to self-cannibalism. In her letter to Marin, she tells her that people like them would be better off dead.
The world above wants no monsters in it.
Marin is horrified that this is all there is for people like her. She doesn't want to end up like her mother. She has a breakdown over the fact that if only her mother stayed with her and taught her things, she wouldn't have killed and ate all those people she killed and ate, essentially blaming everyone and everything but herself. It makes it very hard to sympathize with such an annoying character like her, but I don't think this is the main problem. Unlikable protagonists should exist, but you still have to make people root for them or at least be interested in what the heck is gonna happen to them. You have to keep people engaged. While watching Bones and All, I just didn't care about anyone. The funniest part for me though was the fair. Before visiting her mother, Marin together with Lee stop at a local fair where at one point Marin announces that she's hungry. Lee, being the nicest boyfriend that he is, goes and lures a man working at one of the game booths so that he and Marin can eat. And it's all fine until Marin discovers that the man has a family. She loses it on Lee, like he was supposed to know this, like if the dude didn't have a family, it would have been totally okay to kill him. I understand that her being a hypocrite is a part of her journey, but only if the journey didn't end like it did. Bones and All doesn't have a flow. It feels like a bunch of disjointed scenes that were stitched together. There's so many holes and spaces that are begging to be filled. One of them being Marin and Lee's split, which is completely pointless. Marin runs away from Lee because she doesn't agree with his way of living.
I can't be around you anymore. I can't think.
But she does it only to come back to him a couple of scenes later, and you don't know where she's been and what type of thinking she's done. Nothing. If Marin narrated her story, if there was a voiceover, especially between the scenes like this one, it would have been so much better for understanding what is going on in her head. She just seems very distant. I know the movie is based on a book by the same name. I haven't read it, so I don't know what kind of POV it has, but I know the ending because I was curious and I looked it up. I believe Marin's behavior would have made better sense if the movie had the book's ending in which, spoiler alert, Marin totally succumbs to being the cannibal. She realizes that this monster inside of her is who she really is, basically. Movie's ending, however, focuses on Lee more than Marin. Marin taught Lee the value of human connection, the value of family. So after they break up for like 10 minutes, he decides to return home to his sister and mom and not be a drifter anymore.
Can you stay?
This time I can, yeah.
When Marin and Lee reunite, he lets his guard down for the first time and confesses his biggest sin. He ate his own father, who was also a cannibal, on top of being just a shitty human being, an abuser and alcoholic. The hardest part for Lee was to accept the fact that he enjoyed it.
And it felt fucking great.
I think if the script really pushed these characters to the darker side, you would get something like Bonnie and Clyde cannibal version. Nonetheless, Lee and Marin choose a good side. They want to try living like normal people. Marin gets a job at a university bookstore. I've said that the last 30 minutes is what I craved for Lee and Marin to have from the very beginning. The way they look at each other and flirt and banter. I needed these moments throughout the whole runtime. Sadly, their ideal happy life gets destroyed by Sally, who breaks into the apartment and attacks Marin. Sally has been stalking her for a while. The couple manages to kill him, but Lee gets fatally wounded in the process. His dying wish is for Marin to eat him bones and all. When he says it out loud, it actually sounds a bit cringy. To eat someone bones and all is the ultimate act a cannibal can do. As they say, there's before bones and all and after bones and all. For Marin, it's a way to keep Lee with her forever. His story ends, but you don't get a chance to see how this transforms Marin, even though she's the main character. She's left completely alone. She's right back where she started from. Cannibalism in Bones and All serves more as a commentary on class issues and what it's like surviving on the margins of society, because both Lee and Marin are outcasts. If you narrow it down more, it's about family traumas again. Or, as Timothée Chalamet said, it could be a metaphor for some sort of addiction. Any discussions about cannibal movies always tend to veer into the direction of being vegan or vegetarian. The writer of the original story is actually a certified vegan lifestyle coach and educator, and in the acknowledgements she writes, quote, "When people who know I'm vegan hear I've written a book about cannibals, they think it's bizarre, hilarious, or both. The short version is that I believe the world would be a far safer place if we, as individuals and as a society, took a hard, honest look at our practice of flesh eating, along with its environmental and spiritual consequences." End quote. There's one scene where Marin and Lee have their first kiss in the slaughterhouse, and Marin comments on how animals have families too, which might remotely point to an idea that cannibals are not worse than people who consume animal meat. Maybe. I didn't feel like Bones and All had much commentary on environment. Oftentimes, the main characters in movies about cannibals are vegetarians or vegans. It's a new thing now to show a bigger contrast.
I just don't eat animals.
But not in Bones and All. Here they eat all sorts of meat. Bones and All had astonishing promotional trailers and posters. The marketing was 10 out of 10. One poster was painted by American artist Elizabeth Peyton, and it's exactly what I envisioned this movie would be like, the overall feel of it. On the poster, the faces of Marin and Lee merge into each other, and it looks like it's a mix of blood, sweat, and tears. I loved what the director said about it. Quote, "I said to Elizabeth, find the image in the movie that you want to comment on. And she found the final kiss, which is a very ambiguous kiss. Is it a kiss of love or a kiss of annihilation? Is it a kiss of eating the other or a kiss of falling into the other? The kiss is always a very dangerous moment." End quote. When I first heard the name Bones and All, I thought cannibalism would be an allegory for passionate love that ends with protagonists physically devouring each other as the final act of devotion and surrender. But oh well, woe is me. Fresh is an extremely entertaining but overall empty movie. The story follows Noah, a 20-something woman who is sick of the dating scene. And it's understandable. Being on dating apps feels like you're packaging yourself in a cutesy box with a cutesy bow and waiting for someone to finally purchase you. Despite this pretty universal feeling, some people are still on dating apps, and Noah is one of them. The irony and contradiction are the centerpieces of modern dating, and this is what I thought the movie Fresh was trying to explore at first. Our hypocrisy as humans. The movie opens with Noah going on a worst date imaginable with a caricature of a guy named Chad.
You stuck-up bitch.
Later, when Noah complains about dating to her best friend Molly, they poke fun at Disney princesses that apparently have been teaching girls that they need a man.
Stupid bitch left the whole sea for a man. Come on now.
And it's hilarious because a minute later you see Noah swiping on guys again, and eventually she drops everything to be with the man of her dreams, ignoring red flags along the way. When I read a couple of interviews with the director and writer of the movie, I realized that they didn't intend it to come off this way. And Fresh is actually a feminist horror that illustrates what it's like to be a woman in the dating scene. Sounds good on paper, but I believe it backfired a bit in some places. After her failed date, Noah meets Steve, an attractive plastic surgeon undercover cannibal who sells female meat to other super wealthy cannibals. They hit it off instantly. There's flirting and chemistry and all sorts of sparks flying around, and everything seems to be too good to be true. No alarm bells go off in Noah's head when Steve tells her he doesn't have any social media, which isn't a crazy thing to say. Not everyone likes social media or has a consistent presence on any of the platforms, but the fact that Noah doesn't even ask basic questions like, what hospital or private clinic do you work at? is silly. If the movie had at least one scene with Noah trying to question some parts of Steve's life and him maneuvering his way out of the situation, it would show that Noah is not a complete dummy and Steve is in fact the master manipulator.
You lost my trust, Noah. So they're gonna have to be consequences.
It's like the movie desperately tried avoiding certain tropes to present a strong female lead, but ended up still perpetuating many of them. Pretty soon, Steve invites Noah for a weekend trip, just the two of them. And against the advice of her best friend Molly, Noah agrees to it. Steve says they will stay the night at his place first and then go to their ultimate destination in the morning. When they get to Steve's house, he gives Noah a spiked drink that makes her pass out. When Noah wakes up, she finds herself on a mattress, chained to the floor. Steve announces that he's going to sell her flesh and hair to rich men, since there is a whole black market for this. He's not going to kill Noah right away though. To keep the meat as fresh as possible, he will slowly portion her out between his clients, chip away at her body piece by piece, limb by limb. Fresh is very straightforward with its use of cannibalism to show the objectification and commodification of female bodies. The first part of Noah's body Steve decides to cut off is her ass. And when Molly gets captured, Steve takes her boob. It's very clear-cut. Noah's only chance at escaping is by seducing Steve. Something you've never seen before. Gee, I wonder if she'll bite his dick or something, huh? I don't know if this was the intent of the director and the writer again. Maybe they were trying to show how women change themselves to appeal to men, how women have to be nice to get out of unpleasant situations, but I haven't found any discussion about it in interviews. It's just funny to me that almost every article on Fresh talks about how this movie subverts the tropes, and how it's almost the first ever horror to feature strong and smart female characters. And I just wonder what kind of movies people are watching, because it's what, 2023 now? There are plenty of female-centric stories of different genres. You can go and watch non-English movies. You can even go back to the 90s, 80s, 70s, 60s and find amazing examples of very interesting female characters. I do like Noah, she's cool, but she's a bit far from being the horror role model. Her friend Molly is probably a way better. She's the one who smells something fishy when she tries texting Noah and ends up getting almost an automatic reply with a stock photo of the waterfall. To find more about Steve, Molly decides to go to a bar Noah and Steve had their first date at, since she knows the bartender Paul who served that night. Hesitant at first, Paul ultimately gives Molly Steve's full name. With this information, she's able to find his wife Anne on Facebook, plus their address, so she decides to pay them a visit. Anne lets Molly inside and she seems nice and considerate at first, but soon you'll learn that she's on her husband's side and partially or fully involved in the business. Molly gets captured, but before going to Steve's house, she shared her location with Paul. And Paul's situation is one of the points people bring up when they mention that this movie subverts tropes. Despite knowing Molly's whereabouts, Paul isn't in a hurry to go and check what's going on, even when he notices that his messages to Molly stopped getting delivered. Closer to the end of the movie, when girls need help the most, as they are trying to escape from the freaking butcher's house, Paul finally gets to the place, but as soon as he hears gunshots, he decides to nope out of there. It's a comedic moment, and I laughed without thinking much of it. Except apparently, this scene is crucial because this is how Fresh avoids damsel in distress trope. The writer Lauren Kahn commented, quote, "Paul is a couple of different things. He's the one that at the end of the day is going to make a realistic, rational decision. In the situation that he was in, if he heard shots fired, he made the most grounded, realistic decision with not really knowing the details. So he's not a bad guy. He's us, is how I saw it. What was the bigger theme for me was the women had to save themselves, and that's how I knew I had to get there. So this other stuff happened around Paul, but I feel like he's a good dude, and you can tell that the whole time. But it's not going to end up the way you think it is, because in real life it probably wouldn't. And I think that's sort of what he represented." End quote. It's so weird how this was the only possible way to get to the point where the girls escape using their own brains and strength. You can remove the scene or Paul completely for that matter and it would not affect the story. Or if you want to push the whole female empowerment and friendship, wouldn't it be more interesting to make the bartender a woman who helps the main characters run away in some capacity? At least call the cops, especially if we are going to talk about real life. Paul doesn't do it, even though this is what he advises Molly to do.
Why don't you just go to the police?
The police.
And what's so wrong with the idea of getting saved by a man? When people talk about the whole damsel in distress trope, I don't have many issues with the woman being rescued by a man, for sure not in horror movies. It's more about the way a female character is portrayed and developed as a whole. Imagine getting in a very bad situation. Wouldn't you want someone to come and do something? Wouldn't you be asking or screaming for help? Or would you be like, nah, I'm a big girl, I have to handle it on my own? Aren't we teaching people now how to properly ask for help? Before reading all the interviews, I couldn't care less about the whole scene, but now knowing that Paul was created just to serve as a gotcha moment that I wasn't even thinking about rubs me the wrong way a bit. The second point that people bring up when they discuss Fresh is that there is no final girl. When I watch horror movies, I personally like guessing who is going to stay alive and who isn't, so again, I don't mind such endings. But in the movie, Noah discovers that there is another girl behind the wall and her name is Penny. They become close, and when Noah's plan to gain Steve's trust reaches its climax and she manages to get free, she doesn't forget about the girls, Molly and Penny. All three of them cooperatively fight Steve and run away into the woods. The first two acts of the movie are pretty fresh and engaging, like it's a setup for a grand finale which never comes. The last 30 minutes fall flat as everything goes down the path of horror cliches. The most disappointing part for me is related to Steve's death. When the girls tackle him in the kitchen, they just knock him out and that's it. They don't check if he's alive or not, and they don't kill him. It's a bit unclear to me why the final battle doesn't end in the kitchen. That would have been very symbolic considering what this man did to these women. Throughout the movie, Penny and Noah are building up their hatred towards Steve and all of his male clients. Penny describes in great detail in what ways she wants this man to suffer.
I just want to hurt him.
It's all I think about.
Yet when it comes to the actual confrontation, it's very underwhelming. When the girls run into the woods, Steve follows them because they didn't kill him, but this time he has a gun in his hands. The girls manage to attack him the second time, and it's like a switch turns on in their heads, and they remember that it's him. It's the guy who tortured them. So they start kicking him. This scene is supposed to show all the pent-up anger they've been collecting inside them, but it's pretty short, and after doing this, Noah grabs the gun and shoots Steve. She does say one thing before it, but it's nothing groundbreaking or smart. I even thought I've seen something like this before.
Give me a smile.
So we just had a reaction of, that's it? I say this because Steve's wife Anne has a more violent end. She's a very fascinating character that unfortunately gets used to deliver the cringiest and most shallow remark. You learn that Anne has a prosthetic leg, which might indicate that she was one of Steve's victims at some point. Now she's his wife and ally. They have kids together. Their relationship is weirdly tense, and it might be a case of Stockholm Syndrome. On the night of the escape, she and her assistant/bodyguard show up at the house the girls were kept in unannounced because Steve has been ignoring her calls all night. Anne is the one who finds his dead body. Anne then magically stumbles upon Noah in the woods and tries to strangle her. But Noah ends up stabbing Anne in the neck with the keys. Then Molly comes to Noah's rescue and brutally bludgeons Anne with a shovel as she says,
Bitches like you are the fucking problem!
I understand the idea behind it and the attempt at commenting on female solidarity and female betrayal, but from the very beginning the movie was pretty explicit at what it was trying to say. The whole point was to show how women are treated by men. Concluding the story with a take like this undermines the whole message because it feels like the bad people, in this case the bad man, got away. Even Steve, in my opinion, gets a pretty easy way out. I wish the girls performed the same surgeries on him but without the meds. What left a very sour taste in my mouth was the writer's explanation of Anne. Quote, in my mind, she represented the women behind the men. The ones that don't help you, the ones that don't support other women. They're complicated, but they're definitely the evil ones. I was strangely thinking about Donald Trump's election at certain points when I was writing this. And those white women that were kind of the reason we got there. Even with like reproductive rights. There are all these things you're just like, what are you doing? It's like you're not putting all the blame on them, but those are the worst ones. You know she was a victim, so there is a story there that leaves it a little open in terms of how much you blame her. If you look at her Facebook page in the movie, it was curated in a certain way. That's just like a fun Easter egg I thought of when I was writing it. End quote. Usually I love reading interviews with writers and directors because I want to understand the idea behind the movie better or see if I've missed something. It makes me love the movie more. But with Fresh, I wish I hadn't read anything. The quote-unquote fun Easter egg she's talking about is Blue Lives Matter flag you can see while Molly is scrolling through Anne's Facebook page. I'm not American, so I had to Google, and I realized if you have Trump plus reproductive rights plus Blue Lives Matter, all of this point to Anne being a representation of a conservative American woman. It's given pettiness with no nuance. I do believe that most movies are somewhat political. They have their own message, an agenda, whatever you want to call it. What separates Fresh from even let's take the movies I've talked about, Raw and Bones and All, is that those messages are empty. They are too on the nose. A phrase that comes to my mind is don't bite off more than you can chew. One point that I felt like didn't go anywhere and I was a bit bummed about it is related to cannibalism. As I've said, Noah's whole strategy is to gain Steve's trust and make him like her even more. That's why she pretends to have interest in cannibalism.
What does it taste like?
She and Steve begin having dates during which they try different body parts. And there is so much anticipation when Noah tries human meat for the first time, like it's going to change her life forever. I know it's just me, but I fully expected for her character to discover something dark about herself. I wanted to know how all of this affected her. The line that caught my attention came from Steve when he says that he and Noah are very similar.
You know how I knew you were special? Because you're fucked up too.
But Fresh is not this type of movie, and it's okay. It doesn't view cannibalism as some kind of personal psychological notion that is residing within a woman. It represents the outside, the societal attitudes towards women, and how all of this influences their lives. In recent years, cannibalism in movies became a symbol of female rage and resilience, but also female perversion and monstrosity. A new cannibal is now a woman with whom you easily sympathize. I love that these characters look like average women, in a good way. The minimum to no makeup, the simple hair, the repeating of the outfits. There's something weirdly liberating in watching these movies as they tap into our primal desires. It does feel like you want to rip off all of your skin to unleash what's underneath sometimes, or bite a person's face off because you're overwhelmed with love. Apparently it's a real thing and it's called cute aggression. I didn't know that. So don't be afraid to let your little inner cannibal out from time to time.
I'm really fucking hungry.